In real life, radio is a lot like cable TV. It's a dead medium, riddled with ads, has an awful selection, and it's entirely being held up by old people who are afraid of objectively better alternatives. So it's a bit ironic that despite radios in real life being genuinely awful, in video games, radios are viewed as a fun feature. Radios in video games are far cooler, far more fun, and far more versatile as a world-building device than I think anyone gives it credit for. They are always there, always serving a different function, and yet almost always totally overlooked, which I think is really unfortunate. It can be a line of communication, it can add further immersion, it can be a gameplay mechanic you can exploit. Other times it could just be set dressing, which you don't really think would be memorable, but it is. Also, like, they put extreme noise terror in a Ubisoft game. Why is no one talking about that? That's so funny. I'm fully aware that a topic such as radios in video games kind of sounds a bit boring on the surface. It sounds like a lazy cookie-cutter idea for a video essay, but it's something that I'm legitimately overly passionate about and something that I don't think gets nearly enough credit as it deserves. The most common usage of radios in video games is communication. Sometimes it's literal communication, taking the form of radioing another player, like in Lethal Company or Phasmophobia. Sometimes it's simulated communication with NPCs and pre-scripted dialogue, like in Half-Life, Half-Life 2, Metal Gear Solid, Firewatch, and SCP Containment Breach, just to name a few. And lastly is more symbolic communication, like Silent Hill's radio offering as a proximity warning, which is a line of communication between you and your surroundings. It may be kind of simple, but just hearing something on the radio that coincides with what you're actually doing in-game can add such a huge layer of immersion. Hearing police chatter in Need for Speed Most Wanted, where you can hear the police desperately trying to corner you, saying your exact location, where you're headed, and what their next move will be, or in Fear, where the enemies perfectly telegraph their thought process, thus making your gamer brain go, "Whoa, it's like they're real." Much like in Need for Speed, a very similar radio system can be found in another fast-paced, car-based game, Putt-Putt Goes to the Moon, where the radio is broadcasting updates about Putt-Putt on his journey. But regardless of how simple or complex it is, however, at the end of the day, it mostly just boils down to overhearing radio chatter, and that's kind of boring. Most of it is just regular in-game communication, only with a high-pass filter layered on top. Yeah, it's technically the radio, but it's not really what I'm excited to talk about today. The thing I love most is when video game developers manage to seamlessly integrate radio elements into the world it inhabits via custom making its own forms of radio content. Like how in The Sims, instead of just buying the rights to a few songs to play on the radio like most games would do, they feature original performances of these songs in their own made-up language of Simlish. My Chemical Romance, Paramore, Katy Perry, Nelly, even the Black Eyed Peas sings that one song that's aged really poorly. And like, I know it's a made-up language, but Ratada? That's a bit close. It's a little ridiculous gesture to make sure that the songs actually feel like they take place in this universe. It's ridiculous, but it's also really cool and memorable. Other in-game radios include J. Jonah Jameson's podcasts in Spider-Man. Jet Set Radio is literally named off of Jet Set Radio, the in-game pirate radio station at the center of the story, as well as the diegetic source for the music on the soundtrack. But speaking of which, that leads us to the secondary function of the radio, not just to be a fun gimmick, but to be a source of music. Much like how The Sims play their own spin on various songs, a similar thing can be found in Animal Crossing, and other games kind of have their own radio equivalent to play songs from the soundtrack, like Minecraft, Cruelty Squad, Lethal Company, Stardew Valley, just to name a few. But all of these examples are actually pretty tame, because there's one franchise that manages to pull all this off simultaneously, arguably better than anyone else ever could, and you already know what it is. It's GTA is the poster child for an unbelievably solid in-game radio, with a solid licensed song choice complete with satirical advertisements, talk shows, DJs, and also original songs also acting as satire on culture and the genre. It is so iconic that I'm willing to bet every single one of you watching has some sort of connection with or fond memories involving Grand Theft Auto's radio. But before it grew into what it is now, GTA originally started off having a super bare-bones radio. It had 7 different radio stations, only having around 3 original songs each, and it was only implemented because it was the only logical way to have multiple different genres on the soundtrack meshed together convincingly. But with subsequent titles, however, they started rolling out licensed music, funny ads, and just overall expanding its role as the in-game radio by having some semblance of personality and satirical world building. San Andreas, however, is when the radio really started to find its footing, leading further into the satire that we come to expect today.
San Andreas just can't get enough of the glory theme park.
Where strangers become friends.
Although humor has always been a part of Grand Theft Auto's universe, this was the first time it felt way more prominent and way more consistent. Most notably, however, it was also one of the first times where the song selection was starting to get really good, featuring multiple songs from NWA, Snoop, Dre. They also got that one Ice Cube Check Yourself remix that goes like ba ba da ba da ba da ba. That's a good one. It also features songs like Freebird, encouraging you to drive as fast as possible during the solo. The OG Gloria Jones Tainted Love is in the game, as well as America's A Horse with No Name, so you could cosplay as Walter White having an anxiety attack. GTA 4 and its expansions pushed what in-game radio could be even further by adding less obvious choices like Cannibal Corpse, Terrorizer, Bathory, Entombed, Bad Brains, Agnostic Front, and also R. Kelly, but we're just gonna forget about that. However, they also included Genuine's Pony, which I feel balances it out. That song is so unbelievably good, it's criminal. GTA 5, however, that's when the radio really hits its peak. Gimme more West End girls. Lady, hear me tonight. Are you fucking kidding me? There's that one song no one can remember the name of, so you just Googled Mexican beeping song and somehow it knows exactly what you're talking about. That song also rules. The next episode, Rhythm of the Night, How It Was, Feel Good Inc., Subliminal, Kendrick Lamar's Drowning Pools, aka Drank. It even got Danger Zone by Kenny Loggins, who is also one of the radio hosts for Los Santos Rock Radio, but we'll talk about in-game radio hosts a little later. ZZ Top, Aphex Twin, Rick James, Mystique Scandalous. GTA 5 has like so many bangers, it's like obscene. And do you want to know the craziest part? If you look at the cut content for this game, it was almost even better. Problems, Rack City, Banza Make Her Dance, Work Hard, Play Hard, You Oughta Know, Hip to Be Square, Linger, Let It Rock, The Way I Are, and Sean Paul's Temperature. Oh my god! Not only are these great songs, but they're also great songs that perfectly match the environment of the rest of the game, and it's such a bummer they didn't make it into the final version. The music in Grand Theft Auto is such a major part of the experience of playing it. I mean, like, driving around and having the next episode come on the radio is a damn near religious experience. Violent car crashes and people being run over is objectively horrible, but when it's in Grand Theft Auto and this song is playing, it's universally entertaining. But it's not just the music that's an essential part of the vibe, because the amount of funny radio commercials in GTA could honestly make for a whole video by itself.
Do you long for a different time when we were free to raise our children to actually respect us?
Thank you, sir! Thank you, sir!
You've accidentally killed a family of 4. We all know these things happen. You need to get out of jail to beat the out of your old lady for getting you into this mess in the first place, but you need money for bail. That's where we come in.
The reason why GTA's satire ends up feeling so timeless is because the writers do a really great job playing off of concepts and not current events. Instead of mocking a specific political event that no one remembers years later, like every SNL cold open, they play off of general concepts of rampant consumerism, corrupt politicians, the nightmare of capitalism, general human depravity, and how miserable we all are. Things that are, unfortunately, timeless and universally understood. Yay!
Heartbreak today as a man was killed at a protest against violence. Henry Diaz was knifed to death at a protest against the death of Martin Smith, who was shot at a demonstration the day before.
But for me personally, the thing that I find especially admirable is just the sheer amount of silly shit that goes above and beyond that most people aren't even going to notice, but it's just there to be cool. Like having Tyler the Creator be a guest caller, Hannibal Buress be a street reporter, and even David Firth just kind of shows up for no reason. All just little details that are very easily missed, but ultimately exist just to be cool. I also love the little detail of being able to import your own music complete with commercials and a DJ who would vaguely insinuate that all of these songs are pirated, which it's just a bunch of little details that don't need to be there, but give it so much personality that I think really helps it stand out and actually be memorable. They also use the radio to help immersion in some ways, like having the radio host predict what the weather will be just a few minutes before the in-game weather actually changes. And also by having fake bands like Love Fist play on the radio, who you later end up meeting in-game, which is something that I think is so influential that you could actually see this concept be used in more modern titles, but we'll talk about those in a second. But alright, before I finally move on to talk about another video games radio, we have to take a moment to talk about GTA 6. I mean, come on. Considering how much the world and music culture has shifted since 2013, it's a little hard to guess what exactly they're going to do with their radio, but that won't stop me from trying. One, they're definitely going to lean really hard on mocking alpha culture and just in general toxic sexist losers that we just keep seeing everywhere lately. Two, the concept of crazy conspiracy guy ranting insanity is a staple at least once in nearly every Grand Theft Auto game, but given, Republicans lately, there's definitely going to be a huge increase in mocking this kind of person. 3, they're definitely going to have Doja Cat. I mean, I bet Real Money Say So is going to be in there somewhere. Same with Hyperpop. I mean, if they're smart, they're definitely going to have 100 gecs somewhere on the radio. Maybe they'll do something drastic, like instead of it being the radio, it's some sort of music app equivalent, and your character's too broke to pay for premium, and that's why you get ads and interruptions every so often. That way it still functionally acts as a radio, but more, updated for the modern era. Who knows? I'm just spitballing ideas. But regardless of what they do, as long as they have Sean Paul's temperature this time, I'll be happy. But all predictions aside, there is another Rockstar title that handles having a radio much differently and much more uniquely. And, it's Red Dead Redemption. Games like Red Dead Redemption and Red Dead Redemption 2 do not feature radio due to the game taking place before the existence of the radio. But it does occasionally make up for this by having your band of outlaws sing songs while traveling from point A to point B, or just while sitting around the campfire, which sounds silly, but honestly, it's super fun. Hey. If you've never played Red Dead, I'm aware that this sounds cheesy. It sounds like it wouldn't work, but when you play, it just fully adds to the immersion in a way radio never could. It makes you actually care more about the rest of your crew, since singing together is actually a terrific bonding exercise that you don't really see get utilized in video games that often.
I got a girl in I'm messing up. I got a girl across the lane.
I mean, come on, you gotta admit, that's nice. Assassin's Creed's Black Flag will play different sea shanties recorded in one take to simulate the feeling of being with your crew, singing as you go from location to location, which is a bit of a step down from this, but it's still a really nice rendition of this approach. This is because singing is significantly more diegetic. And for the few of you that are unfamiliar with the term, there are essentially 2 different types of sound in media. There's diegetic sound, which is sound that's heard by both you, the audience, and me, the character, like a telephone ringing loudly, annoying both you and me. And non-diegetic sound, which exists solely for you guys, the audience, that I can't hear, like background music or a transition jingle. The reason why I bring this up is because all in-game radios are technically, by definition, diegetic. But not really, or at least not convincingly all the time. Although the radio might be playing Britney Spears in-game, I do not believe that I am listening to Britney Spears with Franklin, Trevor, and Michael. Yes, it is technically playing in their car and they are listening to it, but considering there's zero acknowledgement from any of the characters, as well as it just generally feeling a little bit out of place for them, it doesn't feel diegetic at all. But when Arthur and his gang are all singing songs together, I fully buy that we're listening to the same thing because of course we are. There's no separation here. This feels like I'm singing songs with my crew. This does not feel like I'm listening to Genuine with Trevor. Both are technically diegetic, but only one of them feels diegetic. I consider this to be diegetic dissonance, which is technically not a term, but I'm making it one. But alright, enough of that, because you know what everyone in Red Dead Redemption has in common? They all have a big iron on their hip. This is a segue. Fallout New Vegas got some bangers, dude. We got Big Iron. Dude, Johnny Guitar. His last name is Guitar, bro. I'm in love with the guy just hearing about him. People who claim to hate country get real quiet all of a sudden whenever Marty Robbins' Big Iron gets mentioned, and for good reason. It rules. This right here is a certified songs that get white people turned classic, dude. It's great. I got spurs that jingle, jangle, jingle. Yeehaw, dude, that's awesome. Also, the UI attached with listening to the radio feels much nicer and much more grounded in comparison to most other titles, which I really appreciate. I don't really have much more to say about it other than it's iconic for a reason, and the song selection is actually surprisingly good. And, speaking of surprisingly good song selection, we all know Saints Row. It's the broke, ugly cousin of Grand Theft Auto. Their radio selection, although occasionally having more noteworthy licensed music, does feel way less like a hand-picked, fitting selection for the game, and more so like a Spotify shuffle. There are some recognizable names and some surprisingly decent song choices, but it just feels like overcompensation, you know? Like, if you spent all the money to get all these songs featured on your in-game radio, couldn't the money have gone towards making, like, a better game or something? I don't know. But as harsh as that is to say, I am going to say something controversial. Their individual track list can oftentimes be better than Grand Theft Auto? I know. Let me explain. Saints Row has more individual tracks that appeal more to me personally, but Grand Theft Auto's lineup feels 10 times more cohesive, which leads to it having a better feel overall as opposed to individually. Or to put it simply, this selection of songs feels like this. It's a good match. But this selection of songs, although pretty good, definitely doesn't feel like this. Like who is in charge of this? And although the selection is good on paper, it fundamentally misunderstands that the radio isn't simply just a collection of songs to listen to while you drive around. It's an extension of the world itself and also a tool for world building. This is something that Grand Theft Auto, Cyberpunk, and even Vampire the Masquerade's radio understands, but something that Saints Row doesn't even seem remotely interested in. But credit where credit is due, I do feel like Saints Row does actually offer what I consider to be a much needed innovation. Special radio channels. On the surface, Saints Row's radio channels seem incredibly bland, offering a very safe, predictable selection of radio channels. Literally every station is exactly what you'd expect it to be at first glance, and it just feels so unbearably bland. However, all of this just gets completely thrown right out the window when it comes to the 10th radio station, which is, and I'm not even joking, just Nuclear Blast Records. While seemingly every other station has no real sense of identity, one of the stations they just straight up gave to someone else. In previous titles, they also had their own Adult Swim radio and a radio station dedicated to the record label Mad Decent featuring Riff Raff as the DJ. And it is not a coincidence that these are the only noteworthy stations that Saints Row has to offer. They're kinda onto something here. Honestly, I would love to see more of this type of thing across all genres in video game radios moving forward. I think it would be really cool. Grand Theft Auto did experiment with this a little bit with Fly Low FM, which I think is really cool, but I think it could go a lot further. But alright, that's enough Saints Row. Let's move on to a different title. Far Cry 3 radio serves more as tonal ambience, having songs that feel like it would take place in this part of the world, but also making sure that the audio quality is just completely awful. The radio in this game sounds like it's playing on really cheap speakers in a barely functioning car that you found on the side of the road because, you know, that's exactly what's happening. That, combined with the fact that you could barely hear it over the sounds of you driving, really solidifies the radio in this game as being less of a soundtrack and more so just background ambience that you don't really notice until it stops. It's fairly insignificant, but it's a really nice immersive touch that they just kind of flush down the toilet for Far Cry 4. In Far Cry 4, they decided to add Rabi Ray Rana as the DJ, and although there's nothing wrong with him, he seems like a great guy, you will very quickly hate him because he just doesn't shut the fuck up. And it's not like there's another radio station you could switch to if you want to hear something different. The radio options in this game are on or off, and if it's on, he's yapping. Granted, it would be totally different if he was saying something that was worthwhile or offered some sort of legitimately funny satire, but instead they just give him 2 voice lines, so you're essentially just hearing the same 2 monologues as you drive around from point A to point B. It's like they specifically designed him to make you frustrated and just turn off the radio. It sucks. Far Cry 3 didn't have a radio host at all, and given the poor audio quality and the sound of the music just being completely drowned out by the road, it worked perfectly and it didn't demand your attention in the slightest. The radio here felt like it existed just to allow you to reflect on your actions, look at your surroundings, and just generally get a little bit more immersed into this world. But for Far Cry 4, they were just like, oh yeah, that's cool. What if instead we just like get rid of all of this and just make you listen to some dude's podcast? That sounds awesome. It's not important enough to listen to, like with some games, and it's too annoying to ignore. That is so stupid. Literally, why would you do that? But hey, on the note of DJ Rabi Ray Rana, there are plenty of other radio hosts in video games that are actually implemented pretty well. Channel X got Keith Morris, who was a vocalist for Black Flag, Circle Jerks, and Off. K-Dust got Axl Rose from Guns N' Roses, who has the voice of an angel. Nonstop Pop got Cara Delevingne, who's famous for just a bunch of stuff. But let's not forget Mr. New Vegas, who is just charming as hell. His role is pretty simple. He plays music, he reports on the news, usually in regards to your in-game actions, and he just occasionally drops some of the smoothest lines I've ever heard in my life.
It's me again, Mr. New Vegas, reminding you that you're nobody till somebody loves you, and that somebody is me. I love you.
He's a great example of a radio host with just enough personality that you like him, but not too much personality that you wish he'd shut up. There's also DJ Veteran Child from Saints Row 2, who I'm pretty much only including for this line.
This is Veteran Child. What you want to hear next on Gen X?
Misery Business by Paramore.
Shaundi? Is that you?
Can you just play the damn song?
You're asking me to do you a favor?
I'm asking you to do your job.
God, you're such a Shandy. But it's a good song, so fine.
See, that's how you do it. You say something funny, not have it last too long, and then you shut up while the song plays. Something that some DJs really struggle with, apparently. Trent Reznor from Nine Inch Nails was actually originally scheduled to be the radio host for Pre-Millennium Radio that was cut from GTA 5. Or, at least that's what people say, because there isn't actually a single definable source for this at all. This is a super common GTA fun fact, but it seems like only one guy said this one time due to the logo being a loose parody of Nine Inch Nails, then everyone just decided to roll with it because they thought it would be cool. But unfortunately, I do think that this is just nothing more than speculative fan fiction, but it would be cool. DJ Professor K from Jet Set Radio claims to play nothing but non-stop hardcore music, despite not playing a single hardcore track. Interesting. Listen, I don't like throwing around the P word very often, but DJ Professor K, you got some explaining to do, buddy. Don't get me wrong, Hideki Naganuma does some killer OST work, but I don't think we're gonna see him at This Is Hardcore Fest anytime soon, you know? And if we're gonna talk about video game radio hosts, it would be criminal to overlook Laszlo.
Yeah, that was really all right.
Laszlo Jones is voiced by Laszlo Jones and modeled after the late, great Laszlo Jones. And not only is he the only prominent reoccurring radio host throughout the series, being involved in every single title since 2001, but he is also involved in seemingly every noteworthy Rockstar title. Although most people know that Laszlo is based off of a real person, I don't think most people fully grasp that this is a little bit more like the GTA equivalent of the Toby Fox dog, serving a bit more as a creator's self-insert rather than just a reoccurring character. He seems to be one of the main people in charge of spearheading what made GTA's radio so much fun and so memorable, and if it wasn't for that, I doubt we would have seen such a prominent ripple effect into other video games, and this video also might not exist if it wasn't for him. So everyone give it up for Laszlo. Yay, thanks buddy. Alright, everyone settle down and let's move on to the next game. Cyberpunk 2077 has a surprisingly limited radio, but arguably a much more concrete and better radio. It might just be personal preference, but listening to Left Unsaid's Retro Genesis as you drive through a town that looks like this at night in the rain just gives me legitimate goosebumps. In GTA, the radio felt like fun world building, but this feels more like artful world building, or at least I appreciate it more as art than I do just as blanket entertainment. In terms of noteworthy tracks, it doesn't have near as much of a heavy-hitting roster by comparison, but there is one thing that it has that other video games really struggle with, and it's a seriously defined sense of identity. It looks good, it sounds good, it feels good, and more importantly, it feels unmistakably like Night City. It's one of the few radios in video games I've felt like I've had a real emotional connection to on a few occasions. Like, if you've seen the anime tie-in, for example, it sets you up perfectly just for you to be driving around, minding your own business, having fun, only to have this song start playing on the radio, and you just get crushed by this emotional weight that stops you in your tracks whether you like it or not. Like, you know how sometimes in real life you'll be having a good day and then something small will remind you of a bad time and then you'll get hit with a wave of sadness or grief over a loved one or a situation? It manages to make you feel that way in-game about events that took place in this universe, and that is peak immersion to me. That no other in-game radio has ever made me feel that way before. But on the note of immersion, much like how The Sims will goofily twist songs into being more fitting for their universe, Cyberpunk 2077 does not feature any noteworthy artists at all, but instead has noteworthy artists adopt a pseudonym and publish songs not as themselves, but as a band that exists solely within the Cyberpunk universe. This is one of those details that may technically be totally unnecessary, but just adds so much texture that really adds up to a truly unique experience. But the same could be said for really every radio station in video games. Super cool, but ultimately not fully necessary. I know it's harsh to say, but imagine it from a business perspective. Imagine pitching the idea of setting up all these complex mechanics, spending God knows how much money on licensed songs, hiring additional voice talent into a video game merely as an optional flourish. But despite all that, despite the uphill battle of trying to convince your boss that it is worth the extra resources and money, in-game radios persist. And although it never gets talked about for some reason, it is always a huge part of the world, and I love and appreciate it. Thank you for watching.
Neighbors called 911 found the father in his car listening to the radio. Several days before the murders, neighbors behind you. I said Look behind you, like he was chanting some strange.
Oh, hey, I totally forgot to talk about that radio. That's my bad. Listen, I know that there are definitely plenty of games that have radios that I didn't talk about. Like Sleeping Dogs has a radio, Ratchet and Clank has a radio, Mafia, True Crime, New York City, LA Noir, City Skylines, Burnout, Paradise. I never played them, so I don't know what to tell you. Despite video game radios being an extremely small, technically unnecessary component to video games, there is still so much to talk about that this video is only just like barely scratching the surface. Like how you could import your own songs for helicopter support music in Metal Gear Solid 5, or like how in Watch Dogs they had like 4 good songs on it, but the predecessor ended up having a bunch of bizarre picks like Anal Nathrok, Delta Heavy, Bolt Thrower, Extreme Noise Terror, and Big Shack of all people. Also, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines has a radio talk show called The Deb of Night, complete with commercials and music breaks, but it's surprisingly not that noteworthy. The tone feels appropriate for the setting and the song selection is great, but it's all just recycled from other aspects of the game, so the radio here doesn't really bring anything new to the table. People also created an unofficial radio for Starfield since Bethesda just didn't put anything in the actual game despite them very clearly understanding the importance of one. But I don't know, man. There's a lot of radios is my point. If there's anything else that I missed, please make sure to gush about it in the comments because I would actually love to hear it. I promise I'm not saying that for engagement. I'm genuinely interested. Same with GTA 6 predictions as well. I'm super curious in hearing what y'all think they'll do for the radio. Anyways, I just think that radios in video games are really cool, and I'm bummed that they don't really seem to get the amount of attention that I think they deserve. And as a green screen YouTuber who is making a video talking about video game stuff, I'm fully aware that I'm just gonna get flooded with comments comparing me to other YouTubers, but that's fine because I got really excited about this idea and I just couldn't help myself and I had to passionately word vomit about it. But anyways, follow me on stuff if you want, do these things if you want, share the video if you want. They all would really help me out a lot, and that's it. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.